Hello everyone, welcome to the sixth class of the pattern language course. Today we shall be having a peer review session and a working session. In the peer review, we shall look at the patterns that we have developed so far and receive feedback from the other groups so we can improve on our patterns. And for the working session, we shall be working with the pattern field and understanding how to develop a pattern field, how to scale the patterns, and also group them in the different relevant dimensions. So stay tuned. So today is more of a peer review session. So we are going to see each other's work, but we are also going to understand a bit more on what they call the pattern field, which I think you've come across in some of the literature I've shared with you. But today we'll look at it in depth. So we're going to begin with the assignment review. If you remember from last week, you were to complete your patterns, including patterns from the KCCA lecture. So some new patterns, and you're supposed to document these and also brainstorm on what potential project we can implement in Chitintale. So I hope you all met in your groups and had a chance to go over this. And also, I'm hoping you all use the resources. At least you just open the book. Like, just see how many pages does it have? What font are they using? Really, the basics. Yeah? So I'm hoping you all took a look at some of the material that I've shared on the group. I also expect that you deliberated on this format and that while you're presenting as a group, you will justify why you're keeping the sections that you have.
Good afternoon. Yeah, we had come up with some patterns from the earlier classes, but after that book that Madame shared, we first of all it described. We got to understand the characteristics of what patterns should be, so we're able to maybe filter out some and see that these are not patterns. So we got that, first of all, they're concise. So it's only the relevant information that we need. And they're expressed in, can be visual, conceptual, theoretical. And well, the thing that shocked us the most was the fact that they have to be optimistic. So instead of seeing what the problems are, we could have to see a positive way in which they could be impacting the community or how they can solve. And also the fact that the patterns everywhere, like we said, some they're in the book and they're in another country, but we could draw similarities here. So the first pattern that we agreed on and was quite evident is the water access. The title we gave it is water access, and the problems it tackles was access to clean water and the draining away of gray water, runoff water. So the channels and the drainage channels and storage channels, and then the access to the wetland. We also saw that as it's where people can also get water. So water access is definitely a part. People are very resourceful with where they can get the water, depending those who are near the well, those who are near the swamp, yeah, and how they get it out of their houses. So yeah, and we use the visual image of the well, try to sketch it out, and this pattern connects to drainage, preventive flooding measures, because we noticed in some areas, some of the houses had like parapet walls to like keep like water from the road into their house. So like there's this type of short walls, like 300 meters. So, and also the narrow bridges where people cross, so those are connected, and the accessibility. We kept most of the rows for this format because it aligned with what we found in the book, the problems it tackles. So try to be positive about what was good about it, and relationship, because like the book said, they're connected to the other patterns. The part we're not sure about is the hypothesis and practical implications, because we didn't know whether it was theories of architecture or like urban design theories. And for practical implications, we were a bit undecided, like whether these are effects that are there right now or effects that could happen if the pattern is implemented. So the team was a bit 50-50 split. We didn't know which one to go with.
So as a group, we went ahead to look at some other pattern, that is accessibility. And for this one, we managed to give a hypothesis, and we described it as a narrow passageways and paths limit mobility and access within the community. So this pattern tackles problems such as vehicle access, pedestrian walkways, parking, and access to needs. And we also went ahead to look at the practical implication. Because we have all these access routes, we got to realize that there are few cars in the area compared to cycling and all that. And then there is effective use of space. Each space that is there is used because people want to build and then access the different structures they've put up. And for this pattern, we got to sketch showing the routes where the vehicles pass and some of the smaller routes that lead into the residentials within the site. And then we got to realize the relationships with other patterns which we identified, that is narrow passages, food stalls, small scale businesses, drainage channels, narrow bridges, and services, because we need routes to reach these different services, stalls, small businesses, and the different residentials. Then the other pattern we identified was farming. And for this, we looked at the problem it tackles. And with farming, people get to access food and then earn from the crops that they are selling. After farming, they sell out the products. And some of the things that are grown are sugar canes, which we identified at the island. And this pattern relates with other patterns such as food stores, because we get crops from the farm and then sell them. Then we have green spaces and then small scale businesses.
So our biggest pattern is we decided to take Chitintale Zone 12 as a pattern itself, because the patterns have to lead us into one connected area. And just like we see from the pattern language, having the townscape as a very large pattern. So we have Chitintale Zone 12. We have pockets of spaces. We have graffiti for arts and crafts. We have urban food garden. We have courtyards. We have industrial area. Then we have shops along the street. We are not so sure about these ones. Shops along the street. Then we have social sustainability. Yeah, so we have Chitintale Zone 12 as our largest or the biggest pattern that we have. So we believe that all these patterns, well connected properly and networked, they will lead us into having one group of patterns that make up Chitintale Zone 12. And this was from the LC chairman's speech where we got this pattern. And we believe that under the leadership of the LC1 chairman, Chitintale Zone 12 is a jurisdiction, a territory, and is geographically bound as a valley. So the problem it tackles, for example, is to have the the law and order. And then the practical implication is in terms of resource distribution, as we've seen that these people come together to take decisions. So how we decided to show it is that we attached the map of the zone that we got from the as a resource of the lecture. And then I'll talk about pockets of space. The hypothesis here is that these spaces are formed from the clustered and unplanned urban form. So they create small urban space, small public spaces, and also courtyards. So the problems is that they tackle the lack of public space, and then they ensure they tackle insecurity, because there are always eyes within these pockets. And then also mobility in terms of mental maps. So people within the place can tend to identify where they are within Chitintale Zone 12 by identifying which space they are in, even if the place is clustered. So the practical implication is that they create public space, they create space for playing for children, gathering and meeting points, then there is mobility and security. So we showed an image, a sketch of different houses and these different pockets that are within this. So it relates with the path. It obviously relates with Chitintale Zone 12.
So the other pattern that we noticed is urban food gardening, which could be relatable with the former group that was farming. So these are like areas that have been gazetted for planting mainly food crops for the community. And some of the problems that we saw that it tackles is food insecurity, unemployment to one extent, because we look at how at the island, we see that these youth actually go there, they plant their crops, and later on they can sell it out to the restaurants nearby, and as well as the community. Then some of the practical implications that we saw was fighting food security, income, and ecological preservation, in a way that most of them, instead of encroaching into the wetland, they are using it to plant crops. And that is protecting the natural environment. The other pattern is paths. To this pattern, we related it to the accessibility and the relationship between the man-made paths and drainage. So we realized that most of the footpaths are next to or near drainage systems. So we demonstrated it like this, where we have the settlement around, and there are two lines that represent the water and the footpaths. So this connects to accessibility and security, and then drainage. Then the other pattern that we noticed is social sustainability. So in this, we said Chitintale has a resilient mechanism of maintaining and improving the well-being of its community. So this is related to the teaching that we had of, they told us they have youth groups and those other groups that come in, and in it they find ways in which they can survive as a community. So that is where we said there is a pattern of social sustainability, like the youth empowerment and etc.
So for our patterns, we were still discussing. I'll first of all go through the patterns we found to be like most significant, and those are the ones we were giving the blue stickers. And then my colleagues shall go through the other patterns, though some patterns are connected to these ones, but the relevance was questioned by my members, which is still under discussion. For the first pattern, we looked at as a pattern, life between buildings, that is Happy Road, Chitintale. Happy Road is in Happy Street in Chitintale. So community engagement, hypothesis, community engagement, social interaction, and overall quality of life will improve if these spaces are if the life between buildings is improved. So some of the related patterns are hierarchy of paths. So for the hierarchy of paths, we looked at creating a network of paths with varying sizes and functionalities, because when you look at it, as you come from the wider roads entering deeper into the slum, the roads tend to have different activities around them, which we looked at as a pattern. So we looked at having those networks of paths with varying sizes and functionalities in a way that can improve the accessibility and pedestrian movement. So the related pattern, as I said, is life between buildings. So we also looked at community groups as one of the major patterns. There are different community groups like the Banachivuga, Street Minds, the Mateka dance groups, and these help with promoting the culture of the slum or the environment, and also economic empowerment, because like the graffiti group gets money when they do their work. We also looked at the library as one of a pattern. This is because it encourages socio-economic activities in the community. The other pattern we looked at was activity nodes. So there are spaces or places in the community that encourage community engagement, like the boxing arena, the skate park, there is the different children play areas. So we looked at also those ones in a way that will attract people to go to them and also improve people's well-being.
Building typology, which I would ideally equate to building materiality, where we saw that most of the structures had similar outlook, and then some of them had raised foundations. And one of the problems we saw, the problem to it would basically be flooding. And then the skate park was another pattern that we saw, in that it accommodated a lot of social activities within the space, contributing to social activity happening. And because of that, we thought that there would be issues of community engagement, would have education happening, and some sort of women empowerment.
So we also looked at container gardens as a pattern. And the hypothesis was implementing container gardens in slums can improve access to fresh produce, increase community engagement, and in food production. And the problems it tackles are limited access to fresh, healthy food due to lack of space to grow that produce and resources. Then the practical implication was to increase food security, improve nutrition, improve air quality, potential income generation, and selling their surplus produce. Also, as Madam was talking earlier on, she kind of tickled our minds to think about how last week's lecture could improve our explanations, and I thought about our pattern hierarchy of path. And we noticed as we approached the site, along the road, there were more major activities like markets, bigger shops like supermarkets, and bigger buildings. And most of that is because there's zoning that's done. And in most cases, you'll find that KCC has a hierarchy of these residential areas, there's industrial, there's residential has both low density and high density. And that's where you find, as we went inside, you would find shops with houses in the background, but some of the houses were bigger than others, considering where we ended up. And those houses we found along those first shops are the low density. I know it doesn't sound right for it to be in the opposite way, but there's low density and high density. And the high density are the ones we found down, which had more of clusters and paths to move between.
Then the other pattern we had is social zones. And these social zones, these are community spaces where people interact and learn. And this pattern is connected to creativity spaces, which she talked about. Then it's also connected to earning and meeting spaces, because it's these same zones when people learn, interact and learn, then they can when they learn, they can make a living. Then it's also connected to social education.
Okay, we are continuing with our patterns, and we have front door and pathways. As the hypothesis is the front door, we try to focus on provide clear entrance point and pathways to enhance the safety. As we went through the Chitintale, we realized that people, they just find a place and build without planning. And here we try to focus on how some people, they just open their doors along the street, which it is not safety. And we are trying to tackle how the implications. We try the clear entry points and pathway will be placed and appropriately to enhance the safety.
Then the last one I have is the image of the place. We identified that this community had culture, and you can identify it easily because it's different from another community you'd go to because of the graffiti that they do in the area, and you find it on the walls. That makes it easy to, these different paths that you find within the area makes it easy to find your way within it. And also the way it's zoned, like this is the embassy area, this is that place where the adults were, and then the skate park, and then the boxing area. All that helps you know the image of the place and wayfinding. So this is connected to pathways.
I only have 3 patterns, and the first one is social education. So the hypothesis is there's giving back to the community, there's learning skills from community members, as we see. They have a library and they have computer sessions, language. They have this thing that they give back to their community. Not necessarily you learn and then you go out, but you come back and give back your community for growth. So the practical implication was that they have a library where they do computer studies, their languages, and they also have sports and arts. That's other different activities. And this also relates to social zonings and basically social zoning. The other pattern is people government. The hypothesis is political organization and the level of problem solving. So we see that they have a systematic organization on how they solve their problems, starting from the groups that they have, and then they go to the LC's level, and then they go to other LC levels, and then it becomes now a regional government issue. So this is more of relating with young youth and adults. So how do young ones, youths and adults, how do they interact, and what are the rules and regulations that govern them? The last one is cultural boundaries. We have people with different backgrounds, lifestyles, traditions, but they all live in one area. So there's need of cultural boundary. This also provides safety, privacy, and the sense of belonging. So from here, we see that there are different zones, starting with the LC's office all the way to the skateboard park, where we see around the skateboard, we see majority of the people who are around there are just young kids. But as you move further towards the island, you see now youth, which there is a sense of boundary where the factory, behind the factory, it creates that sense of a boundary between the young ones and the youths. So whatever is happening on this side is clearly separated from whatever is happening on the other side. So that's a clear definition of cultural boundaries. And then we have, this one relates to drainage and pathways also.
So we are going to present to you our different patterns. One of our first patterns was engaging activities. As we saw in the Chitintale, that in that skating area, they had many activities that would bring the youth, especially the youth, together, which included the farming, the fashion, the dancing, the graffiti, as our colleagues have talked about, and the hypothesis, engaging activities. Yeah. So The hypothesis is there are various activities such as skating, dancing, farming, fashion that bring different people together. And the problem it tackles include cultural differences and idleness. The practical implications are it brings people together within the different activities they're doing. It provides them with different skill sets and provides employment. And then the different patterns that it relates to include meeting places, mixed cultures, and togetherness, which are also part of our patterns.
The other pattern we have is called Street and People, and this looks at how the movement and accessibility of things and places in the area. Streets that are well designed decrease the people/autos collision, and some of the problem it tackles is street layout, navigation, and security, and the practical implications include landmarks, safety, proper layout of streets. This looks at how, as the boy mentioned in Character of the Street, just how wide they are or how small they are and how people navigate in them while going to some places. As we mentioned in the previous group session we had, that if you're new in the community or in the neighborhood, you may get lost easily. I'll talk about another one, which is innovative project. And Chitintale has various groups of people doing different things, including dancing, fashion, graffiti, and others. What we really appreciated is how the people come out with these things, and it helped the community. For example, unemployment or idleness or the crime. Yeah. And also some of the practical implications, it encourages creativity and provides employment to people.
Yeah, we have to move on to the next part. So as you improve, complete, finish, we are moving to another stage of refinement for the patterns. So have you come across the pattern field? I think in one of the literatures I gave you, there was a pattern field stroke matrix. Have you guys seen it? So after developing patterns, yes, very nice, Edgar. Everybody, notebooks and pens. After developing the patterns, we have to go through a process of organizing this information, right? So right now it feels like it's a lot of information and it's still very scattered, right? Yes. So now we have to go to a stage where we start to try and refine and organize this information. That's the whole purpose of this methodology, actually, is to help to organize complex and varying information in a way that's easy to understand and explain and also employ in maybe a project. So what's the first stage of organization? Skills. So what we are going to do is to try and scale your patterns. Some of you can already guess what scales your patterns exist on, right? For example, the paths, the pattern of the paths, which many groups had, that's on the street scale, right? These are scales I use, but general skills in urban design or urban planning. I believe this is it, but in case you find a new scale, you can add it. So there is the detail, which we may not look at so much. There is the house. So you understand when I say detail is like the concrete beam, that scale. Yeah. Then we have the scale of a house, which I also don't think we'll use much of. And then we have the courtyard scale. So that's like a cluster of houses, right? You can also call it maybe the cluster scale if that's what you want to call it, but you understand what it means. And I think many patterns start from that scale, or even the house. Some patterns can start from the house. There's a group that had something to do with the front door. That's at the scale of a house, right? Then we have the neighborhood scale, which ideally, I think zone 12, that's probably at the neighborhood scale. So you guys who had that pattern, that would be at that scale. The people who had the pattern to do with the police station, I think, would also be at this scale. Then we have the town or the city scale, where I'm trying to now get you to reach. So some of these, the KCA patterns, I believe, would fall at this scale, at the city scale. But there could be some patterns among your patterns that could be at the city scale. I don't know. I don't remember hearing any, but they could be. Then there is this category that's transscalar. Do you know what that means? It cuts across, or it can't be put on a scale. For example, somebody had, or there's a group that had social sustainability. At what scale? You see, eh? So some patterns, you can't really place them. So they would be in that category. Those are the ones we have, but you can add or remove. But generally, these are the scales that you have to work with, right? So that's one way to start to organize your patterns. You can always reflect back and say, maybe this was a better pattern. And at this stage, you're going to see a lot of that, right? So you get your 11 to maybe 20 patterns and say, okay, what's at the house scale? What's at the courtyard scale? What's at the neighborhood? What's at the city? Is that clear? And then you code them accordingly. Then we're going to look at his pattern field. So essentially, it's what do you call this? X and Y? The axis, yeah? Essentially, this is what you start with. And on the Y is the scale, right? Is this clear? And on the X is what we call what the range of the pattern is. So from concrete to abstract. Concrete is more tangible, and as you tend towards the abstract, which is the intangible. So your patterns are somewhere along that axis, tending towards more concrete or tending towards more abstract. And abstract are the things you can't really touch. You can't point at it and say, this is social sustainability, right? But you can say this is a street, or this is a library, or this is a car park. So you try to place them along this in that way. You may find that your entire matrix is concentrated like in maybe this very abstract and very large scale patterns. Now the issue with that, it's not a bad thing. However, how do you implement these patterns if all of them are intangible and at a very high scale? Do you understand? But patterns here are more, they're easier to implement. It's a thing, right? At this scale, we can do this. And then we know that it's still feeding back to a pattern at this scale. And here you can see, we can see if we can read some of these patterns. For example, okay, this scale is reversed, so it's from abstract to concrete, the way they did theirs. But we can see a concrete small scale pattern at the street is like public arts for these guys, right? And then they have safety as an abstract high scale pattern. And somewhere in the middle, they have things like public buildings or mix of land use. All those are landing somewhere in the middle. So somewhere between the street and the city center. So for example, if you say economic livelihood as a theme, some patterns fall under this, right? The guys that were looking at shops and all that. Yeah. So this is also one way of organizing the patterns. But I think for what we shall look at is just try to use the general, let's use general themes of social patterns, economic patterns, environmental patterns, technology. These guys even have philosophical, but I don't know if you, I think there's one or two groups that had some very deep patterns. So you may or may not add philosophical. It's not critical. I would also add to this political. Yeah, I would add to it political. So I'll show you a pattern field that's this is from my work. And here I merged using the scale. So you can see the scale: house, courtyard, street, neighborhood, zone, or word, because now that's KCCA's way of labeling, or zoning, the smallest administrative unit. And then you have the division, then you have the city, and then you also have up to national level. And then I use the spatial, and then social, economic, and political. But that's after looking at my patterns like 500 times. So who do we have next week? Next week we have a professor. He's called Victor Munoz Sanz. He's Spanish Mexican. He's coming from TU Delft. Why we have so many people from TU Delft is because it's maybe the only institution that's really taking the pattern language methodology to depth. So most of the people we are bringing have worked with it in practice. He's worked with a certain group of architects to employ the method in Netherlands with factory workers, some project he will explain. And he will also explain to us how to employ this method in a workshop, because the week after we are going to Chitintale for workshops.
Hello everyone, my name is Matthew Muhwezi. I'm a student of the Pattern Language course. Today we had an interesting session where our work was being reviewed. We learned about the different patterns and how to scale them from the detailed scale to the town scale. We also learned how to classify them as either concrete or abstract. It was a really fun and interactive class. We hope to see you next time.